Your soulmate's ex is facing serious consequences. My child, do not move past these words too quickly. Something has shifted in a place you cannot see, and what you are about to hear was meant to reach you before you made another assumption about the silence surrounding your soulmate. Pause here for a moment, because the situation you thought was finished has entered a completely different chapter. There has been a consequence, an unexpected turning point, and a truth that could no longer remain hidden. But listen carefully, this is not a message of revenge. This is not heaven asking you to celebrate another person's difficulty. What is unfolding is about truth meeting responsibility, old choices producing their natural results, and your soulmate finally seeing something they once refused to see. And the most surprising part is not what happened to their ex. The most surprising part is what your soulmate did immediately afterward. There is a reason your spirit may have felt strangely unsettled lately. Perhaps you could not explain it. Perhaps there were moments when an old memory suddenly returned without invitation, or when you wondered why someone who once seemed so connected to you could remain silent for so long. In this fictional spiritual story, imagine heaven watching two hearts standing on opposite sides of a misunderstanding. One heart has been learning patience. The other has been learning discernment. And between them stood unfinished history, old loyalties, outside voices, and one person from the past whose influence lasted much longer than anyone realized. Your soulmate believed they had already closed that chapter. They believed the past had no power over the present. But what happened recently forced them to understand that closing a door physically is not the same as closing it emotionally. Their ex is now facing serious consequences connected to choices they made, promises they failed to honor, and a pattern they believed would never catch up with them. Do not imagine punishment descending dramatically from the sky. The truth is more subtle than that, and perhaps more powerful. Sometimes consequences arrive quietly. A person loses trust. A carefully maintained image begins to crack. People start comparing words with actions. Contradictions become impossible to explain. Relationships change. Opportunities disappear. Those who once defended someone begin asking questions. And suddenly the person who controlled the story no longer controls how others understand it. That is the kind of turning point taking place here. Your soulmate's ex has reached a moment where explanations are no longer enough, because the people around them have started looking at what actually happened. Your soulmate did not expect to become involved. In fact, they had been trying to distance themselves from everything connected to that chapter. They were tired of revisiting old conversations. Tired of wondering who had been truthful. Tired of carrying questions that never received satisfying answers. There came a point when your soulmate told themselves, quietly and almost stubbornly, "I am done looking backward." But then something reached them. It may have been a conversation, a message, an unexpected admission, or information shared by someone who had remained silent before. Whatever form it took, it contained one detail that made your soulmate stop completely. Because suddenly something you once said made sense. That is where this story changes. There was something you tried to communicate long ago, perhaps not perfectly, perhaps during an emotional moment, perhaps in a way your soulmate misunderstood. You were attempting to show them that the situation was not as simple as it appeared. You may have sensed inconsistencies they dismissed. You may have questioned motives they defended. You may have stepped away rather than compete for someone's attention. And because you did not constantly explain yourself, your silence was interpreted incorrectly. Your soulmate once wondered whether you had stopped caring. They wondered whether your distance meant indifference. They may even have allowed another person's version of you to become louder than their own intuition. But the detail that surfaced recently brought one of those forgotten conversations back into their mind. Your soulmate remembered your face. They remembered your tone. They remembered how you did not attack anyone. You simply tried to tell them something was wrong. And then they remembered what happened afterward. For the first time, they were forced to consider a painful possibility. Perhaps you had not walked away because you lacked love. Perhaps you walked away because you had enough self-respect not to remain inside a situation where truth had become impossible to separate from manipulation. Perhaps your silence was not abandonment. Perhaps it was the final boundary of someone who had already explained enough. That realization affected your soulmate more deeply than anyone around them understood. They became unusually quiet. Someone near them noticed immediately. They asked whether everything was okay, but your soulmate gave a short answer and changed the subject. Inside, however, memories were moving rapidly. Small moments that once seemed unrelated began connecting. A sentence their ex once said. A question you once asked. A strange contradiction. A moment when your soulmate defended someone without having the entire story. Your expression afterward. Your decision not to argue. Your disappearance into silence. Piece after piece began falling into place. And this is important, beloved child, the consequence facing the ex is only the surface of what is unfolding. The deeper transformation is happening inside your soulmate. They are confronting their own judgment. They are asking themselves questions they avoided for a long time. Why did I believe that version so quickly? Why did I never ask for the other side? Why did I interpret silence as guilt? Why did I expect someone I loved to keep proving themselves to me? One question hurt more than all the others. What if I hurt the person who was actually trying to protect my peace? Your soulmate could not dismiss that question. They tried. They picked up their phone and put it down again. They walked into another room hoping movement would interrupt their thoughts. They distracted themselves with ordinary responsibilities, but your memory followed them into every quiet space. And strangely, the memories returning were not the dramatic ones. They remembered the small things. The way you listened. The patience you showed when they were difficult to understand. The times you could have embarrassed them but chose discretion. The moments when you protected something private between you rather than turning it into gossip. Those memories became evidence of their own. For so long, your soulmate had focused on what you did not do. You did not chase enough. You did not explain forever. You did not fight publicly for your place. But now they are beginning to understand what you did do. You protected your dignity. You respected boundaries. You refused to become cruel simply because you were hurt. You carried emotions privately that could easily have become public drama. And suddenly your silence looks different to them. But there is more. The person who revealed the new information did not stop with one detail. Another truth emerged, and this one concerned your soulmate directly. They discovered that at least one misunderstanding between you had been strengthened by information that was incomplete, exaggerated, or presented without context. It does not mean every problem between you came from someone else. Your soulmate still has responsibility for their choices, and so do you within this fictional story. But it means the picture they were given was not the complete picture. That realization was devastating in a quiet way. Because your soulmate remembered making decisions based on that picture. They remembered withdrawing when they should have asked questions. They remembered doubting when they should have listened. They remembered watching you become quieter and assuming you were losing interest, when perhaps you were becoming exhausted from having your intentions questioned. There is a particular kind of regret that arrives when a person realizes the truth was standing near them all along. It does not scream. It sits heavily in the chest. It makes ordinary rooms feel different. It makes old conversations replay with new meanings. That is where your soulmate finds themselves now. And yet heaven would tell you, do not turn their regret into your victory. You were never meant to win against another human being. Love is not a courtroom where one heart must be declared innocent and another condemned. What matters now is whether truth creates growth. Your soulmate's ex facing consequences may have opened the door, but your soulmate must decide whether they will actually walk through it with maturity. Will they acknowledge their mistakes? Will they stop blaming circumstances? Will they become honest about what they allowed? Will they finally speak to you without hiding behind pride? That decision has not been easy. Because your soulmate is afraid of one thing. Not rejection exactly. Something deeper. They are afraid that they understood everything too late. There was once a version of you who would have answered immediately. A version who waited for clarity. A version who secretly hoped your soulmate would recognize what was happening without forcing you to explain yourself one more time. But time changed you. Silence taught you. Disappointment reshaped your expectations. Your soulmate senses this even from a distance. They know they cannot return casually and expect to find you standing exactly where they left you. That knowledge is why their phone has become such a complicated object lately. They have considered reaching out. More than once. They have imagined different opening sentences, rejected them, rewritten them mentally, and then convinced themselves to wait. I need to explain something, sounded too formal. Can we talk, sounded too frightening. I found something out, seemed as though it would immediately reopen the past. And the words they truly wanted to say felt almost impossible. I think I finally understand what you were trying to tell me. But they have not sent those words yet. There is something else they believe they need to understand first. The consequences surrounding their ex have exposed a pattern, and your soulmate is beginning to realize that this pattern may have influenced more than one moment between you. They started looking backward carefully, not because they want to live in the past, but because they no longer trust their previous interpretation of it. And during this process, they remembered a particular day. A day you may have assumed they forgot. Your soulmate remembers exactly how that conversation ended. You said something that sounded simple at the time. You were tired. Your words were calmer than your emotions. You did not demand anything. You did not threaten to leave. You simply communicated, in your own way, that one day they might understand why you were stepping back. At the time, your soulmate thought you were being dramatic. Now those words haunt them. Because that day was followed by an interaction with their ex that they never told you about. Nothing sensational happened. No secret romance needs to be invented here. The hidden significance was emotional. Their ex said something about you, something small enough to sound believable and specific enough to create doubt. Your soulmate carried that doubt into the way they treated you. They never gave you the chance to answer because they never told you the accusation existed. And now they have discovered where that claim came from. It was not what they believed. Imagine the silence in that moment. Your soulmate stared at the information in front of them and felt their stomach tighten. The memory returned immediately. Your confusion. Their coldness. Your attempt to understand why their energy had changed. Their refusal to explain. Now they know. You were responding to a question you had never been told was being asked. That is why you could never solve it. You cannot defend yourself against an accusation nobody gives you. Your soulmate understands this now, and it has changed something fundamental inside them. Their regret is no longer simply about missing you. Missing someone can be romanticized. This is different. They are recognizing where they failed to communicate honestly. They are recognizing how fear made them vulnerable to assumptions. They are recognizing that love without trust becomes a maze where both people eventually become lost. But here is where the mystery deepens. When your soulmate discovered this, their first instinct was not to confront their ex. It was to defend you. For perhaps the first time in this entire situation, someone tried to casually repeat an old characterization of you, and your soulmate stopped them. Their response surprised everyone nearby because it came quickly, almost instinctively. No. That's not fair. The room changed. The person speaking went quiet. Your soulmate continued. They said they had learned enough to know that certain things about you had been misunderstood. They admitted that they themselves had contributed to that misunderstanding. They refused to let your name become part of another careless conversation. And afterward, when they were alone, the significance of what they had just done finally reached them. They had defended you when you were not there to hear it. Exactly as you once defended them. That parallel shook them. There are moments when growth announces itself loudly, and there are moments when it appears in a sentence spoken before the mind has time to calculate. Your soulmate realized that their instinct had changed. They were no longer trying to protect an old story. They were trying to protect the truth. But truth demands more than private realization. Sooner or later, it requires action. Your soulmate knows this. That is why they have been wrestling with whether to contact you. They do not want to return merely because another relationship or connection has become complicated. They know how that would appear. They do not want you thinking you are a second option or a safe place they remembered only after someone else disappointed them. What they are beginning to understand is that their feelings for you never disappeared in the clean, convenient way they pretended. They buried them under explanations. Under pride. Under unfinished history. Under the belief that moving forward required pretending backward never mattered. But buried feelings are not healed feelings. And when the truth surfaced, everything they had buried moved with it. Still, beloved child, your role is not to run toward them because this fictional message creates urgency. Divine guidance does not require panic. What is meant to be approached with wisdom should never be approached through fear. If someone returns to your life, let their actions reveal whether they have genuinely changed. Listen to apologies, but also observe consistency. Hear explanations, but do not abandon discernment. Compassion does not require forgetting what you learned. Because your soulmate is about to face that same lesson. The consequences surrounding their ex have reached another stage. People who once remained neutral are speaking. Something previously dismissed has been reconsidered. Your soulmate now has access to a fuller version of events, and within that version is one final detail connected directly to the night everything between you began to change. They did not know this detail existed. Neither did you. Someone else did. And that person has finally decided to speak. Your soulmate received a message from them unexpectedly. At first, they almost ignored it because the name was unfamiliar. Then they read the opening sentence. Their entire expression changed. The message did not begin with gossip about the ex. It began with your name. Your soulmate read the first few lines once. Then again. Then a third time, slowly. They sat down. For several minutes they did nothing except stare at the screen, because the person writing claimed to have witnessed something your soulmate had spent months, perhaps much longer, trying to understand. Something connected to why you suddenly became distant. Something connected to what the ex had said. Something that explained why two people with genuine feelings ended up believing completely different versions of the same moment. Your soulmate's hands became unsteady. Not because they were afraid of the person messaging them, but because one sentence confirmed the possibility they had been resisting all day. You had been telling the truth. Not perfectly. Not completely. But about the one thing that mattered most, you had been telling the truth. And now your soulmate faced a choice that could no longer be postponed. They could remain silent, carry the knowledge privately, and allow pride to protect them from an uncomfortable conversation. Or they could finally approach you with honesty. They opened your contact. Your name appeared on the screen. Their thumb hovered over the message field. For a moment, they typed nothing. Then slowly, they began writing. The first sentence was deleted. The second was deleted too. They closed their eyes, remembering everything they had just learned. Your patience. Their doubt. The ex's influence. The consequences now unfolding. The person who finally came forward. The sentence proving you had not deceived them in the way they once feared. Then your soulmate opened their eyes and typed again. This time they did not delete it. But before they could press send, another message arrived from the same person who had revealed the truth. Your soulmate opened it. And what they read next made them immediately erase the message they had been preparing for you. Not because they no longer wanted to reach you. Because they suddenly realized there was one more truth they had to tell you first. A truth about what happened behind your back. A truth that changes the meaning of the entire story. And the person who finally revealed it ended their message with 6 words your soulmate never expected to read. There is something you still don't know. My precious one, the 6 words remained on the screen longer than your soulmate wanted to admit. There is something you still don't know. For several seconds, they could not bring themselves to read further. The room around them seemed strangely quiet, as though every ordinary sound had moved farther away. Their unfinished message to you was still sitting beneath their thumb, but suddenly it felt premature. Something else was coming. Something connected to the misunderstanding that had separated 2 hearts, and your soulmate could feel that whatever appeared next would force them to look at the past without excuses. They had already learned enough to question everything. They had already discovered that you had been telling the truth about the matter that once made them doubt you. Yet the person messaging them was suggesting that even this revelation was incomplete. Your soulmate stared at those words and felt an instinct they had ignored too many times before. Do not rush. Read carefully. This time, understand before reacting. That realization alone showed how much had changed inside them. In the past, they had allowed emotion to reach conclusions before truth had finished speaking. They had reacted to fragments. They had trusted impressions. They had mistaken confidence for honesty and silence for guilt. But now they were sitting with the uncomfortable knowledge that one impulsive assumption can alter the direction of an entire relationship. So they waited a moment before opening the next message. And when they finally did, the first thing they saw was not an accusation. It was an apology. The person wrote that they had wanted to speak sooner. That sentence immediately changed the atmosphere. They explained that they had witnessed pieces of the situation from a distance and had initially convinced themselves it was none of their business. They had watched conversations happen. They had heard your name mentioned. They had noticed how certain details changed slightly depending on who was listening. But at the time, they had not understood how much those small distortions were affecting your soulmate's perception of you. By the time they realized the damage, you had already begun stepping away. Your soulmate stopped reading. They remembered that period. You had not disappeared suddenly. That was the story they told themselves afterward because it was easier than remembering the truth. You had withdrawn gradually. First, you stopped explaining every emotion. Then you stopped asking why their energy had changed. Then you stopped trying to correct assumptions. Your replies became shorter, not because your feelings had disappeared, but because you had become tired of proving intentions that should have been understood through your actions. Your soulmate saw it now. And the realization hurt. There had been signs everywhere. You were not asking them to choose you against the world. You were asking for something much simpler, fairness. You wanted them to speak to you before believing things about you. You wanted them to ask questions rather than silently build conclusions. You wanted the relationship to become a place where uncertainty could be discussed instead of weaponized. But your soulmate had not understood that then. The message continued. The person explained that there was a particular conversation involving the ex that your soulmate had never heard in full. Only part of it had reached them, and the missing part changed its meaning completely. Your soulmate remembered the conversation immediately because it had influenced one of their biggest decisions about you. They had carried one sentence from that conversation for a long time. They had repeated it privately whenever they felt tempted to trust you again. But now they were being told that the sentence had been removed from its context. And then came the detail your soulmate was not prepared for. The person messaging them had proof. Not dramatic proof designed to humiliate anyone. Not something meant for public exposure. It was simply enough context to establish what had actually been said and why. The original conversation had been preserved because of an unrelated reason, and when the person recently looked through it again, they recognized your name. That was when they realized how different the complete exchange was from the version your soulmate had once been given. Your soulmate's breathing changed as they read. The full context did not reveal some enormous conspiracy. In a way, that made it more painful. The damage had come from something smaller and more human: insecurity, selective storytelling, resentment, and the desire to remain important in someone's life after that chapter should have ended. Your soulmate's ex had apparently presented information in a way that encouraged suspicion without making a direct accusation that could easily be challenged. A suggestion here. A carefully timed question there. A sentence beginning with, "I don't want to interfere, but..." A doubtful look. A memory retold with one important detail missing. Individually, none of these things seemed powerful enough to separate two people. Together, they had created fog. And your soulmate had walked directly into it. That realization forced them to put the phone down. They stood and walked toward the window, staring outside without really seeing anything. The consequences now facing their ex suddenly made more sense. This was not one isolated mistake. Other people had apparently begun recognizing similar patterns. Trust had been damaged in several directions. Statements had contradicted one another. People who once accepted explanations had started comparing experiences. The ex was not facing consequences because heaven had chosen an enemy. They were facing the natural outcome of choices that repeatedly weakened trust. And that distinction mattered. Because your soulmate did not feel victorious. They felt sad. There had been a time when anger would have satisfied them. There had been a time when learning the truth might have made them want confrontation. But now they understood that another person's downfall could not repair what had been damaged inside them. Blaming the ex for everything would simply become another way to avoid responsibility. Your soulmate had believed the story. Your soulmate had failed to ask you. Your soulmate had chosen distance. Those truths belonged to them. And for perhaps the first time, they were willing to carry them without hiding behind someone else's behavior. My precious one, that is where genuine change begins. Not when someone discovers who was wrong, but when they become brave enough to discover where they themselves were wrong. Your soulmate could easily have said, "I was manipulated, therefore none of this was my responsibility." Instead, another thought appeared: why was I so willing to doubt someone who had consistently shown me care? That question opened a deeper wound. Your soulmate realized the ex had not created every insecurity. Some already existed inside them. Fear of abandonment. Fear of being deceived. Fear of appearing foolish for trusting someone. Old experiences had taught your soulmate to look for danger even inside affection. When they began caring deeply for you, those fears did not disappear. They became louder because suddenly there was something meaningful to lose. And the ex knew where those fears lived. Perhaps not with some calculated master plan. Human beings are often messier than that. But the ex knew your soulmate's emotional history. They knew which questions would create doubt. They knew which memories still hurt. They knew that suggesting you might eventually disappoint them would touch an insecurity your soulmate had never fully healed. And your soulmate let fear interpret you. Now they were remembering moments that looked completely different through this new understanding. The night you asked, "Why do I feel like you're angry with me?" Your soulmate had denied it. The day you said, "If something is bothering you, please just tell me." They said everything was fine. The moment you finally became quiet and said, "I can't fix something you won't explain." Your soulmate remembered those words exactly. At the time, they interpreted them as frustration. Now they sounded like heartbreak. That memory was the one that nearly broke their composure. Because you had given them an opening. You had asked for the truth. They had chosen silence. Not because they did not care about you, but because they feared your answer. They thought that if they confronted you and their suspicions were confirmed, they would lose you. So instead, they avoided the conversation and slowly created the very distance they feared. The irony was painful. Your soulmate returned to the phone. The person who had revealed everything had sent another message while they were standing by the window. This one was shorter. "I think they deserve to know what happened." They. You. Your soulmate stared at that sentence. They knew the stranger was right. But telling you meant reopening a door your soulmate had once helped close. Would you believe them? Would you care? Would hearing the explanation give you peace, or would it disturb peace you had fought hard to create? Your soulmate did not know. And that uncertainty was teaching them something important. They could not control your response anymore. They could only control the honesty of their approach. That was when your soulmate opened your contact again. This time, they did not start with an apology. They started with truth. "I learned something about what happened between us." They stared at the sentence. It felt too vague. They erased it. Then they typed, "I finally understand why you kept asking me to talk to you." They paused. That one felt different. Because it was not about the ex. It was about their own failure to communicate. They added another sentence. "I should have told you what I was hearing instead of making you guess why I changed." Your soulmate's eyes remained fixed on those words. For the first time, they were not trying to write something impressive. They were not trying to guarantee forgiveness. They were not trying to create the perfect message that would make you return immediately. They were trying to take responsibility. But before sending it, they returned to the conversation with the person who had come forward. One question still troubled them. "Why are you telling me this now?" The response did not arrive immediately. Minutes passed. Your soulmate began wondering whether they had pushed too far. Perhaps the person regretted becoming involved. Perhaps there was nothing else to say. Then the typing indicator appeared. Stopped. Appeared again. Stopped again. Finally, a response arrived. Because I saw what happened afterward. Your soulmate felt that same strange stillness return. Afterward? What did that mean? They typed back. What happened afterward? This time, the answer came quickly. The person explained that after the misunderstanding between you and your soulmate became obvious, they witnessed something involving the ex that made them uncomfortable. The ex seemed pleased that your soulmate had distanced themselves from you. Not openly celebrating, not dramatically announcing anything, but behaving with a sense of relief that suggested the outcome mattered personally. Your soulmate's chest tightened. Still, they refused to jump to conclusions. What exactly did you see? The person answered carefully. They described an ordinary interaction. A conversation among several people. Your name came up. Someone mentioned that you and your soulmate no longer seemed close. The ex responded in a way that appeared casual, but then said something the witness never forgot. Something about your soulmate being better off not knowing everything. That sentence had bothered the witness ever since. Because there was nothing more to know. At least, nothing truthful. Your soulmate read the line repeatedly. Better off not knowing everything. It sounded eerily similar to another sentence their ex had once used privately. Suddenly your soulmate remembered. Months earlier, when they tried to ask for more details about the claims involving you, the ex had discouraged them. Trust me. You don't want to know. At the time, your soulmate interpreted that as protection. Now they understood how powerful that phrase had been. It prevented questions. It transformed missing information into imagined information. And imagination had supplied something far worse than reality. Your soulmate felt a surge of frustration, but they did not act on it. They were learning. Anger wanted immediate confrontation. Wisdom wanted understanding. So they asked one more question. Did they ever say what I supposedly didn't know? The witness replied. No. That single word revealed almost everything. There had been no hidden revelation. Only suggestion. Your soulmate leaned back, overwhelmed by how easily uncertainty had been turned into certainty inside their own mind. But then the witness sent another message. And there is one more reason I'm telling you now. Your soulmate's heart seemed to pause. Another reason? The witness continued. The consequences they're facing now started because someone else questioned a story they were told. Your soulmate read that slowly. Someone else. A different story. A similar pattern. That was why everything was unraveling now. The consequences had not begun with you. Another person had independently noticed inconsistencies. They had asked questions your soulmate failed to ask. They had checked details. And when those details did not align, other people began doing the same. One thread loosened. Then another. Then another. Until the image everyone had accepted could no longer hold together. Your soulmate suddenly understood why the ex had seemed increasingly tense lately. Why mutual acquaintances had become distant. Why certain conversations had ended abruptly when your soulmate entered the room. Why people who once spoke confidently now used careful language. Truth was not exploding. It was emerging. Quietly. And perhaps that was more powerful. Because quiet truth does not need spectacle. It simply survives examination. Your soulmate looked again at the message they had drafted to you. I finally understand why you kept asking me to talk to you. I should have told you what I was hearing instead of making you guess why I changed. Their thumb hovered over send. But they still did not press it. Not yet. There was something they needed to do first. They opened an old conversation. Your conversation. They had not read it in a long time. Scrolling upward felt like entering a room preserved exactly as it had been left. There were ordinary messages. Jokes. Small questions. Moments of warmth that seemed almost painfully innocent now. Your soulmate kept scrolling until they reached the period when everything changed. And there it was. The shift. Your messages became more careful. Their replies became colder. You asked what was wrong. They said, nothing. You asked again later. They changed the subject. Then your soulmate found the message that made them stop completely. You had written, I don't need you to believe I'm perfect. I just need you to ask me before deciding who I am. Your soulmate stared at those words. They had forgotten them. Or perhaps they had tried to. Suddenly the consequences facing the ex became almost irrelevant. Because the real confrontation was happening here, between your soulmate and the person they used to be. They could see the exact moment you offered honesty. They could see their own response beneath it. It was painfully short. I understand. But they had not understood. Not then. Your soulmate covered their face for a moment. The regret was not theatrical. No dramatic collapse. No grand declaration. Just the quiet pain of realizing someone once asked for something reasonable and you were too frightened to give it. Then something unexpected happened. As your soulmate continued scrolling, they found a message from you sent several days later. A message they remembered receiving but had never understood. You had said, one day, if you ever learn the whole story, please don't hate anyone because of me. Just understand why I couldn't stay in the middle of it. Your soulmate froze. That sentence changed everything again. Because you had known. Maybe not every detail. Maybe not exactly what had been said. But you had understood that something outside the relationship was influencing it. And even while leaving, you had not asked your soulmate to punish anyone. You had asked for understanding. Your soulmate read the message again. Then again. Something inside them softened. They had spent hours confronting deception, consequences, regret, and old resentment, but your words were pulling them somewhere different. Toward maturity. Toward peace. Toward a kind of accountability that did not require revenge. Your soulmate realized that if they truly wanted to honor what they had learned, confronting their ex in anger would accomplish nothing. The consequence was already unfolding naturally. People were asking questions. Trust was being reconsidered. The ex would have to face the results of their own decisions. Your soulmate's responsibility was elsewhere. With you. with the truth they owed you, with the apology they had delayed, with the question they were terrified to ask. Is there still any possibility for us? But they knew better than to begin there. They had not earned the right to demand an answer about the future before acknowledging the past. So they returned to their draft. They added, "You don't owe me a response. I just don't want you carrying the idea that I stopped trusting you because of something you actually did. I should have come to you directly, and I didn't." Now the message felt honest. Your soulmate took a slow breath. Their thumb moved toward send. And then their phone rang. The name on the screen made them go completely still. It was the ex. For the first time since everything began unraveling, the person at the center of the old misunderstanding was calling directly. Your soulmate watched the phone ring. Once. Twice. 3 times. They almost declined it. But something told them that avoiding this conversation would repeat the same pattern that had caused so much damage before. So they answered. Hello? Silence. Then a voice. Quieter than expected. I think you know. Your soulmate said nothing. The ex continued. I know someone spoke to you. Still, your soulmate remained calm. They did not accuse. They did not shout. They simply asked. Was it true? A pause followed. Long enough to answer without words. Your soulmate's heart sank. Then the ex finally said something no one expected. Not the way you think. Your soulmate closed their eyes. Those words once would have pulled them immediately into another explanation. Not anymore. What way should I think? Another pause. Then the ex exhaled and said, I never thought it would go this far. Your soulmate's expression changed. There it was. Not a complete confession, but enough to open the door. What did you think would happen? The answer came slowly. I thought you would create some distance. I thought you'd think about things. I didn't think you'd lose them. Your soulmate stopped breathing for a second. Lose them. You. The ex knew the distance had become permanent. They knew their words had contributed. And they had known for longer than your soulmate realized. Your soulmate's voice remained controlled, but something inside them had shifted permanently. You knew I was making decisions based on what you told me? Silence. Then. Yes. One word. No dramatic revelation could have struck harder. Your soulmate looked at your unsent message. They thought about every conversation you had tried to begin. Every time they said nothing was wrong. Every moment you blamed yourself for a change you could not understand. And yet, even now, your soulmate did not scream. They asked the question that mattered most. Why? The ex did not answer immediately. When the response finally came, there was no confidence left in their voice. Because I was afraid. Your soulmate frowned. Afraid of what? Another long silence. Then came the answer. Of what would happen if you realized how much you actually loved them. Your soulmate's eyes widened. Everything became still. The ex continued speaking, but your soulmate barely heard the next few words because that sentence had opened something enormous. How much you actually loved them. The ex had seen it. Before your soulmate admitted it. Before you knew whether you could trust it. Someone from the past had recognized the depth of those feelings and become afraid of what they meant. But your soulmate was not finished. They asked one final question. If you knew I loved them, why did you make me doubt them? The ex inhaled shakily. And then said, because there was something they did for you that you never found out about. Your soulmate's entire body went still. Something you did? Something they never knew? The ex continued. I found out before you did. Your soulmate gripped the phone. What did they do? Silence returned. But this silence felt different. Heavy. Protective. Almost ashamed. Finally the ex whispered. If I tell you, you'll understand why I knew I could never compete with them. Your soulmate's eyes moved toward your name still glowing on the unsent message. Their heart began pounding. Tell me. The ex hesitated. And when they finally began revealing what you had secretly done for your soulmate long before everything fell apart, the very first detail made your soulmate realize that the greatest truth of this entire story had not been about betrayal, consequences, or the past at all. It had always been about the sacrifice you made without ever asking them to know.